in a small house I had bought with 40 years of work, far away from the noise of Manhattan, New York. My daughter-in-law stood in front of me, face red, hands on her hips, and told me I was ungrateful and should leave and never come back. My son stayed silent. I picked up my small handbag and walked out without a word. They thought they had won. They did not know about the papers I had already signed. If you're watching this, please like the video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I still remember the exact moment everything changed. It wasn't a slow shift or a misunderstanding that grew over time. It was sudden, sharp, and loud enough to break something inside me that had taken years to build. I had walked into my son's house on a quiet afternoon, expecting a normal visit. The sky was clear, the air felt light, and nothing warned me that the peace would be shattered in seconds. I stepped into the living room, carrying a small container of food I had cooked earlier, something I often did without thinking twice. I believed I was welcome, believed that a simple act of kindness still meant something in a family. But the moment I crossed the doorway, I saw my daughter-in-law standing in the middle of the room, arms crossed tight, eyes burning with anger that didn't match the calmness of the day. I opened my mouth to speak, but her voice hit me before a single word left mine. It wasn't confusion or irritation. It was rage. She shouted that I was ungrateful, that I brought nothing but trouble, and that she could no longer stand the sight of me. Her words fell like stones, each one heavier than the last, each one cutting deeper into whatever hope I had for peace in that house. And the thing that hurt most wasn't just her shouting. It was the fact that my son stood behind her, silent, offering no defense, no hesitation, not even a small attempt to understand why everything had escalated so quickly. My daughter-in-law pointed toward the door and told me to leave, told me to never come back again. For a moment, I simply stood there, unable to process what was happening. I tried to replay every recent interaction in my mind, searching for something that could justify this explosion, but nothing made sense. There was no argument earlier, no disagreement, no warning signs. It felt like she had been waiting for this moment, planning for it, storing up her anger just so she could throw it at me in one brutal wave. I looked at my son again, hoping he would step forward or even show the smallest sign of discomfort, but he didn't move. His stillness felt like a betrayal deeper than any words she had thrown at me. It was the kind of silence only someone who had chosen a side could hold. My hands grew cold, my breath felt tight, and my food container slipped a little in my grip. I hadn't expected kindness, but I had expected basic respect. Instead, I was being pushed out of a home I had helped them build in countless ways, through support, time, money, and love. I slowly placed the food on the nearest table, not wanting my shaking hands to drop it. I didn't speak because there was nothing to say that would have mattered in that moment. Her shouting continued, echoing in the room, bouncing off the walls that I had once decorated with gifts and framed pictures of family moments. I noticed some of those pictures were gone, replaced by new ones where I was not included. That small change, something most people would never notice, suddenly made sense to me. This wasn't a sudden outburst. This was part of something bigger, something that had been slowly growing behind closed doors. Maybe conversations had been happening without me. Maybe decisions were made without my knowledge. Maybe she had been pushing me away for far longer than I realized, and today was simply the day she chose to make it obvious. My parents had always told me that betrayal rarely begins loudly. It starts quietly, in whispers, in small changes, in looks people think we don't catch. Standing there in my daughter-in-law's living room, I understood exactly what they meant. I felt every year of my age in that moment, not because I was weak, but because I was tired of fighting for a place in a family I had helped build from nothing. When she pointed again at the door, her gesture sharper this time, I finally understood that she was not asking me to leave. She was declaring it. She wanted the control, the power, the authority to decide who belonged in her home, and she believed I no longer did. So I stepped back, slowly, calmly, even though my heart was shaking. I walked toward the door she had turned into a boundary. I didn't slam it. I didn't cry. I didn't plead. I simply left. But as the door closed behind me, something inside me shifted. Pain, yes. Betrayal, yes. But behind all that, a stillness, a clarity. She thought she had pushed me out forever. She had no idea what leaving meant for her future, or for mine. When my daughter-in-law shouted at me, the sound cut through the house like a blade. I stood there with my hands still, my heart heavy but steady. She kept throwing harsh words toward me, blaming me for things I did not do, twisting stories I had never heard, and acting as if I had stolen something from her life. She wanted to see fear in my face. She wanted to see me plead or break, but I did neither. I stood quiet, holding my breath, watching her anger rise higher and higher, like she was trying to make herself bigger with every insult. She expected me to argue, to defend myself, to let her bait pull me into a fight, but I didn't give her that satisfaction. Inside, I felt the first sting of betrayal. This was not the daughter-in-law I welcomed with warm meals, gifts, and open doors. This was not the woman who once hugged me and said she felt lucky to join my family. This was someone different, someone colder, sharper, and hungry for control. Her voice shook with power she thought she had, and she moved around the room like she owned the walls. She believed my silence meant weakness. She believed my calm meant defeat. But I kept my face still, letting her believe every wrong thing she wanted to believe. My son stood behind her, silent and uncomfortable, pretending not to hear her insults. He didn't lift a hand. He didn't say a word to stop her. He didn't even look at me. He stared down at his feet like a child hiding from the truth. The betrayal from him stung even deeper, but I refused to show it. All my life, I gave him support, love, and understanding. I helped him stand when he struggled, and I gave him strength when he doubted himself. And now he stood behind the woman tearing me apart, letting her speak as if I was a stranger who deserved no respect. I kept my posture strong, even when my heart felt like it was folding in on itself. The more she shouted, the calmer I became. I let her voice echo because I wanted her to reveal everything she had been holding inside. Every hidden resentment, every jealous thought, every complaint she whispered behind my back. I wanted it all out in the open, and she gave me exactly that. She accused me of being ungrateful, a burden, a problem in her life. She said I depended on them too much. She claimed I tried to control everything. Her words were full of exaggerations, lies, and twisted truths, but I kept steady. That was when I felt it, the shift inside me. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was clarity. I saw the real truth in her face. She wanted me gone so she could have full control. She wanted my son to choose her completely, with no room for me left in his life. She wanted my place erased. Everything she shouted came from fear, not strength. Fear that I knew more than she wanted me to know. Fear that I was not as powerless as she needed me to be. Fear that her influence over my son could disappear the moment he realized what she truly was. As she continued shouting, I felt a slow, cold smile form inside me, not on my face, but in my mind. It was the smile that comes when a person sees the truth clearly, the smile of someone who remembers they hold more power than others assume. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't answer back. I didn't defend myself. I simply watched her destroy her own mask with her own words. Every insult she hurled became a piece of evidence for me. Every accusation became another reminder of why I needed to step back, gather myself, and prepare for what came next. I let her think she won. I let her think her shouting pushed me out. I let her believe she scared me, because in that moment, letting her believe that was the strongest move I could make, I knew something she didn't, something she could never imagine. I knew I had protection she had no clue about. I knew I held information and rights she couldn't take from me. I knew I would walk out the door for now, but not in defeat. I would walk out to prepare, to think, to gather my strength. And when I returned, in my own way, on my own terms, the outcome would not be what she expected. In that moment, her rage was loud, but my silence was stronger. She thought she pushed me out forever. She had no idea I was only stepping back to make room for the truth she did not see coming. When I think back on the years that led me to that moment with my daughter-in-law screaming in my living room, I realize it was never one big event that broke me. It was a lifetime of giving, a lifetime of trying to keep my family together, and a lifetime of sacrifices that no one ever truly understood. I raised my son through long nights, sickness, school problems, and every challenge a young mother faces. I worked jobs that drained my strength and stole my sleep, just to make sure he had a roof over his head and food on the table. I skipped meals so he could eat. I wore old clothes so he could have new ones for school. I lived with constant worry, but I kept my heart steady because he was my whole world. When he grew older, I believed all my effort had finally been worth it because he became a kind man, or at least I thought he had. As he became an adult, he depended on me in ways that most people never saw. When he needed money for his first apartment, I gave it without hesitation. When he needed help buying a car, I signed the papers and let him use my credit. When he married, I stood by him, supporting the wedding, despite knowing his future wife already had a sharp tongue and a colder heart. I told myself it was just stress. I told myself it would get better. I told myself love would soften her. But love does not change people who believe they are owed everything. Over the years, I helped them financially more times than I can count. I paid bills they could not handle. I helped with repairs. I sent groceries when they complained about expenses. I watched their children whenever they needed a break, and I even cleaned their home during difficult times. I never asked for payment, thanks, or praise. I told myself family should not keep score. I told myself giving was part of being a mother. I told myself one day they would appreciate my support. I held on to that hope, even when small disrespect started to show. My daughter-in-law's attitude changed slowly, like a shadow creeping across the floor. It started with small comments about how I raised my son, about how I cooked, about how old-fashioned I was. She dismissed my thoughts, ignored my advice, and treated me like someone who did not matter. At first, I brushed it off. I blamed the pressure of raising children, money problems, or simple misunderstandings. I never confronted her because I did not want to drive a wedge into my family. I wanted peace, even when it cost me my pride. But the more I stayed quiet, the bolder she became. My son, trapped between us, sometimes defended me, but other times he stayed silent. His silence hurt more than anything she ever said. I never told him how deeply it cut me to watch him turn his head away when she insulted me. I never told him how lonely it felt to sit at their table, offering help while receiving coldness in return. I held all of it in, believing that one day things would change. I continued supporting them, even emotionally. When their marriage had problems, I listened to both sides and tried to guide them. When their debts rose, I paid what I could. When they needed someone to take care of the children, I was there. I told myself that my presence mattered, that I was helping them grow. But while I poured myself into their lives, they never once wondered if I needed help too. They never asked if I had bills, if I had health problems, if I ever felt tired or lonely. As the years passed, I became the silent worker in their home, the invisible helper, the one they leaned on but never appreciated. I watched the pattern form slowly, like cracks appearing in a wall. She took my kindness as weakness. My son took my support as something guaranteed. They both took my presence for granted, and every small disrespect became another stone placed on my back. Looking back now, I see how much I endured without complaint. I see how many lines I allowed them to cross because I believed keeping the family together meant swallowing my pain. I see how much I lost by refusing to defend myself earlier. But the moment my daughter-in-law shouted at me, calling me ungrateful in my own living room, something inside me shifted. All the sacrifices, all the silent suffering, all the years of giving without receiving, they gathered inside me like a storm. And for the first time in a long time, I knew I was not the weak one. I was simply the one who had loved the longest. And I realized something else, something painful but freeing. Their betrayal did not start with that shout. It started years before, the moment they decided my kindness was something they could step on. The truth is, the moment my daughter-in-law shouted at me to get out was not born in a single second. It was built over years, through slow and steady disrespect that had been growing like a quiet storm in the background of my life. Every small act, every little comment, every cold look had been forming a pattern I chose not to see clearly. I had trained myself to stay silent because I wanted peace in my family. I wanted harmony. I wanted my son to be happy in his marriage. But silence has a cost, and I learned that cost one cut at a time. It began with her ignoring me when I visited. I would come into the house, and she would stay on her phone, never lifting her head. She would offer no greeting, no welcome, no acknowledgement that I had walked into a home I helped furnish, a home I helped support. At first, I told myself she was busy, distracted, tired, but over time, I saw that she gave others her full attention, just never me. It hurt in a way I tried to swallow, but the feeling never went away. It sat in my chest like a heavy stone. Then came the complaints, tiny, quiet, constant. She did not want the food I cooked. She did not like the way I folded laundry. She did not approve of how I cleaned, even though the house looked spotless. She never accepted help from me unless she could later twist it into something I did wrong. If I offered to watch the children, she would sigh like I was a burden. If I bought groceries, she would say I picked the wrong items. Every effort I made somehow became a mistake in her eyes. I tried harder, thinking more effort would change something, but it never did. My son stayed silent during these moments. He would look down or walk away. He pretended not to hear the tone she used with me. He pretended her sharp comments were harmless. I had raised him better than that. I had taught him to respect women, to protect the people who cared for him, to value elders. But marriage had pulled him into a world where he chose comfort over courage. I saw it happen slowly, and each time he turned away, I felt another crack inside me. There were also the times she would roll her eyes when I spoke. A small gesture, barely noticeable to someone who didn't understand the history behind it, but I did understand. It meant she saw no value in my words. She saw me as someone outdated, someone unnecessary, someone who could be pushed aside. When I offered advice about the children's health, schooling, or safety, she would dismiss it with a wave. She treated my experience as irrelevant. She treated my presence as optional. Holidays became the hardest. I would sit at the table, listening to conversations happening around me, yet no one included me. She would plan events without inviting me. Family games excluded me. Gifts were handed out with smiles for everyone, but with tight lips when it came to mine. I felt like a shadow in a home I once felt welcome in. My heart felt more alone each year, and my son did not notice. Or maybe he noticed and chose not to care. The worst part was not the disrespect itself. It was the slow erosion of my importance in my own family. I saw myself shrinking in their eyes. I saw my worth reduced to convenience. I was someone they expected to help but never appreciate. Someone they wanted to use but not respect. Someone to blame but never credit. It was as if I was fading from their world, inch by inch, until they believed they could yell at me, order me out, and treat me like a stranger without consequence. But I remembered every moment, every small cut, every cold laugh, every eye roll, every ignored plea. I remembered the times I stayed silent, even when my heart trembled. I remembered the nights I cried alone in my room because I did not want to cause trouble. I remembered my sacrifices, money, time, energy, kindness, all dismissed like meaningless scraps. All these moments built a quiet power inside me, a silent strength that grew stronger the more they underestimated me. They thought they had worn me down. They thought they had broken me into someone who would accept anything. They believed I would take the final blow, the screaming, the order to leave, and walk away defeated. But they had no idea that every small insult was shaping the woman who would soon stand her ground. They had no idea they were pushing me toward a choice I never thought I would make, a choice that would change everything for them. And when I finally left, I did not leave empty. I carried all those years with me, not as pain, but as fuel for what came next. Her shouting did not end that day. It only grew louder in the hours that followed, as if she had been waiting for the moment to finally release every stored insult she had ever kept inside her. What surprised me most was not the words she used, but the confidence in her voice, the boldness in the way she walked around my own living room like she owned every corner of it. She moved from room to room, touching things that did not belong to her, opening drawers she had no right to open, and speaking as if I were the intruder. I stood still for a moment, watching her behavior, feeling the shock deepen inside my chest. It wasn't only anger anymore. It was arrogance, something far colder, far more deliberate, something that made me understand this had not been a sudden outburst. She had been preparing herself to push me out for a long time. She raised her voice again, louder this time, so loud the neighbors could probably hear every word. She enjoyed that. She wanted people to hear. She wanted people to think I was the one in the wrong. She walked toward the front door and swung it open wide, pointing outside like she was showing a misbehaving child the way out. Her tone changed into something mocking, something sharp and cruel, the kind of tone someone uses when they feel powerful and want to remind someone else how powerless they are. She laughed, a laugh that carried more disrespect than any insult could. Her voice echoed off the walls as she told me to hurry up and leave, that my presence made everyone uncomfortable, that I should have known I had overstayed my welcome. My own son stood nearby, silent, pretending not to hear, pretending not to see the way she treated me. His silence cut deeper than her words ever could. Then she stepped closer and lowered her voice, not in kindness, but in a different kind of cruelty, the kind that hides behind a smile but still wounds. She said I had no right to stay here any longer, that this was her home, that she made the rules now, and that I should be grateful she had allowed me to visit for as long as I had. She repeated that word, aloud, as if she were granting a favor to a stranger, not speaking to the mother who raised her husband, supported their home, cooked in this kitchen, cleaned these floors, and helped them through every crisis. I felt a cold ache in my chest hearing her speak that way. She didn't only want me gone, she wanted me small, unwanted, dismissed. Her goal wasn't just the door, it was humiliation. She stepped back, crossed her arms, and looked at me the way someone looks at old furniture they want to throw out. Her eyes were sharp, her mouth curled into a smirk that told me she thought she had already won. She even mentioned how times change and how older people need to know when to leave things to the younger ones, as if I were some faded memory they were tired of carrying. My son stayed quiet, his face stiff, avoiding my eyes like a child ashamed but unwilling to step forward. I understood something then. This wasn't anger. This wasn't frustration. This was a plan, something she had thought through, something she had probably discussed with him behind closed doors. She walked to the window and pulled the curtain aside, as if checking whether anyone outside could see the show she was putting on. I could tell by the way she raised her chin that she wanted witnesses. She wanted people to believe she was in control. She spoke loudly again, her voice carrying out through the open window, maybe hoping a neighbor would hear her tell me to pack my things. She said it slowly, almost proudly, as if she were announcing a great achievement. I felt the humiliation spreading across my skin like heat, but I kept my face still. I did not cry. I did not argue. I did not beg. I stayed quiet, letting her believe she had broken me. She thought she had taken everything from me in that moment, my peace, my home, my sense of belonging. She thought the humiliation would crush me, but what she didn't understand was simple. Silence is not weakness. Sometimes it is preparation. Her mocking words, her raised voice, her public show, her belief that I would walk out with nothing, those things did not weaken me, they sharpened me. Every insult, every laugh, every smug expression built something inside me, something steady, something ready. She believed she was the one with power. She believed I had none. And that belief was the biggest mistake she ever made. When I walked out of that house after she shouted at me, I did not leave with defeat in my heart. I left with clarity. Every word she threw at me, every insult she layered on top of another, settled into a calm place inside me. I stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, letting the cold air settle over my skin. It gave me time to think, to remember, to connect dots I had ignored for months. What she did not know, what even my son did not know, was that I had seen this coming long before either of them opened their mouths. I had watched the shift in their tone, the way they treated me less like family and more like an obligation they wished they could get rid of. That was when I began securing myself. I had lived long enough to understand that people reveal their intentions slowly. It is never sudden. It starts with the way they close doors a little too quickly or exchange quiet looks when they think you are not watching. It shows in how they begin taking small things first: control of the schedule, decisions about the house, small financial choices that were once open conversations. Then it grows. My daughter-in-law had been showing signs for months. She wanted full control of the house, the finances, and the decisions that ran through my son. She wanted to sit at the center of the family circle while pushing everyone else outward. I saw the signs, but I stayed quiet. I wanted to observe. I wanted to be sure. So months before this moment, I started preparing quietly. My first move was reviewing every document with my lawyer: the house, the accounts, the medical directives, the rights that my son thought he controlled. All of it. I had everything checked and updated. I made sure every signature, every stamp, every file was lined up exactly the way I needed it. I had lived through enough surprises in life to never leave myself open again. I added protections, clauses, and backups they didn't know existed. My lawyer told me I was smart to think ahead. I knew I had to be. Age does not always come with weakness. Sometimes it comes with caution, sharpened by experience. I also began gathering evidence quietly, not for revenge, but for protection. Screenshots of messages, notes from conversations, observations of their behavior, financial statements they assumed I never saw. All the little clues they left behind while they underestimated me simply because I was older. They treated me like someone who didn't understand technology, who didn't know how to read financial documents, who would crumble if they raised their voices. They thought they were dealing with a soft woman, someone who had grown fragile with age, but all they saw was the surface. They had no idea what I had learned, what I had survived, or how much strength I carried behind my quiet face. Over time, I learned that the true advantage is never in shouting back. It is in watching, preparing, and moving when the moment is right. My daughter-in-law believed her anger could force me out. She believed her voice and her confidence could strip me of my place in my own home. She had no clue that the property documents were updated and signed months earlier. The deed reflected one name, mine, not hers, not my son's. They had no legal claim, none. More than that, I had structured my affairs in a way that protected me even if something happened to me. I set up trusts. I changed beneficiaries. I named people who truly cared about me, not those who wanted to use me. I placed everything under legal protection that could not be undone without my signature. And because I knew how manipulation works, I made sure my signature could not be forged, overridden, or pressured. I had already built a wall they did not know existed. Standing outside the house after she screamed at me, I felt no fear. For the first time in months, I felt steady. I knew what I had in my possession. I knew what they did not know. I knew the truth, and I knew how deeply they had underestimated me. Her words had no power over me because the real power was already sitting in my bag. Folded copies of the documents she wished she controlled. She believed her shouting could erase my rights. She believed her anger could push me into silence. But I knew something she did not. I had already secured everything. Every document, every decision, every right. She threw me out of the house she thought she could take, but I walked away carrying the one thing she could never touch: my plan, my preparation, and the power they never saw coming. When I walked out of that house after she shouted at me, I did not leave with defeat in my heart. I left with clarity. Every word she threw at me, every insult she layered on top of another, settled into a calm place inside me. I stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, letting the cold air settle over my skin. It gave me time to think, to remember, to connect dots I had ignored for months. What she did not know, what even my son did not know, was that I had seen this coming long before either of them opened their mouths. I had watched the shift in their tone, the way they treated me less like family and more like an obligation they wished they could get rid of. That was when I began securing myself. I had lived long enough to understand that people reveal their intentions slowly. It is never sudden. It starts with the way they close doors a little too quickly or exchange quiet looks when they think you are not watching. It shows in how they begin taking small things first: control of the schedule, decisions about the house, small financial choices that were once open conversations. Then it grows. My daughter-in-law had been showing signs for months. She wanted full control of the house, the finances, and the decisions that ran through my son. She wanted to sit at the center of the family circle while pushing everyone else outward. I saw the signs, but I stayed quiet. I wanted to observe. I wanted to be sure. So months before this moment, I started preparing quietly. My first move was reviewing every document with my lawyer: the house, the accounts, the medical directives, the rights that my son thought he controlled. All of it. I had everything checked and updated. I made sure every signature, every stamp, every file was lined up exactly the way I needed it. I had lived through enough surprises in life to never leave myself open again. I added protections, clauses, and backups they didn't know existed. My lawyer told me I was smart to think ahead. I knew I had to be. Age does not always come with weakness. Sometimes it comes with caution, sharpened by experience. I also began gathering evidence quietly, not for revenge, but for protection. Screenshots of messages, notes from conversations, observations of their behavior, financial statements they assumed I never saw. All the little clues they left behind while they underestimated me simply because I was older. They treated me like someone who didn't understand technology, who didn't know how to read financial documents, who would crumble if they raised their voices. They thought they were dealing with a soft woman, someone who had grown fragile with age. But all they saw was the surface. They had no idea what I had learned, what I had survived, or how much strength I carried behind my quiet face. Over time, I learned that the true advantage is never in shouting back. It is in watching, preparing, and moving when the moment is right. My daughter-in-law believed her anger could force me out. She believed her voice and her confidence could strip me of my place in my own home. She had no clue that the property documents were updated and signed months earlier. The deed reflected one name, mine, not hers, not my son's. They had no legal claim, none. More than that, I had structured my affairs in a way that protected me even if something happened to me. I set up trusts. I changed beneficiaries. I named people who truly cared about me, not those who wanted to use me. I placed everything under legal protection that could not be undone without my signature. And because I knew how manipulation works, I made sure my signature could not be forged, overridden, or pressured. I had already built a wall they did not know existed. Standing outside the house after she screamed at me, I felt no fear. For the first time in months, I felt steady. I knew what I had in my possession. I knew what they did not know. I knew the truth, and I knew how deeply they had underestimated me. Her words had no power over me because the real power was already sitting in my bag, folded copies of the documents she wished she controlled. She believed her shouting could erase my rights. She believed her anger could push me into silence. But I knew something she did not. I had already secured everything, every document, every decision, every right. She threw me out of the house she thought she could take, but I walked away carrying the one thing she could never touch: my plan, my preparation, and the power they never saw coming. After I walked out of that house, the cold air hit my face harder than her words ever could. But even as I stepped off my own porch, something inside me stopped shaking. I felt a strange calm spreading through me, the kind that comes only when a person finally reaches the limit of what they can take. I knew I had to act, and I knew I had to act quietly. I had spent years trying to keep the peace, trying to avoid conflict, trying to be the one who held the family together. But peace had only made them bold. silence had only made them cruel. So that evening, instead of crying on the couch or begging for sympathy, I walked straight to my car and drove to the one person who had always stood by me, my lawyer, a woman who had seen more family disasters than any judge I'd ever met. She opened her office door for me without a single question, and when I sat down in her chair, she just nodded, as if she had been waiting for me to find the courage I'd been hiding for years. I explained everything, how my daughter-in-law shouted at me, how my son stood beside her saying nothing, how they looked at me like I was a burden instead of the woman who had raised him, fed him, and bailed him out of trouble more times than I could count. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't shake. I just talked, steady and flat, like someone reporting the weather, and she listened the same way, calm, patient, but with that sharpness in her eyes that meant she was already planning the next moves before I even finished my story. When I told her about the documents I had signed months ago, the ones my son and his wife didn't know existed, she leaned back in her chair and smiled. It wasn't a cruel smile. It wasn't a smug smile. It was the smile of someone who knew the storm was finally turning in my favor. She began to outline exactly what I needed to do. She told me which papers to gather, what evidence to keep, and what conversations not to have. She told me not to return to the house for anything until she said so, and she assured me, firmly, that I wasn't powerless, no matter how loudly my daughter-in-law had screamed those words. She reminded me that the documents I signed were solid, legally binding, and completely unknown to the two people who had tried to push me out of my own life. For the first time in a long time, I felt grounded. I felt safe. I felt like someone finally saw my worth, even if my own family didn't. When she slid a manila folder across the desk, filled with forms she had already prepared just in case this day ever came, I realized something else. My lawyer had known long before I did that my daughter-in-law would eventually cross a line. After leaving her office, I called one more person, my oldest friend, a woman who had lived through her own battles with ungrateful in-laws. She didn't gasp or ask why I hadn't stood up for myself sooner. She didn't ask what I did wrong. She simply said, "Come stay with me tonight." And that offer alone felt like a warm hand tightening around mine. I drove to her house with a quiet sense of relief, carrying nothing but my purse and the documents that were about to change everything. When I walked inside, she set a cup of tea on the table without another word. We sat in silence for a long time, and for once, silence didn't feel like a weapon. It felt like comfort. That night, I didn't replay the shouting in my head. I didn't cry into the pillow. I didn't feel the sting of humiliation anymore. I felt something stronger. Purpose. Because for years, I had swallowed my pride, ignored the comments, overlooked the disrespect, and convinced myself that family was worth the pain. But that day, after hearing the words, "Get out and never come back," I realized something I should have seen long ago. Family isn't defined by who shares your blood or your name. Family is defined by who shows you respect, who values your presence, and who stands beside you, not when it is easy, but when it is hard. So I made a promise to myself in the quiet of that guest room. I would not walk back into that house as the broken woman they tried to throw out. I would walk back in when the moment was right, with proof, with confidence, and with the law on my side. And when I returned, I wouldn't come back begging. I would come back standing tall, protected, and prepared. Because leaving wasn't defeat. Leaving was the beginning of the plan. Calm that comes from knowing you have truth, proof, and power sitting quietly in your hands. I arrived at the house with the papers tucked inside a folder. The same house where I had once cooked meals, folded blankets, cleaned floors, and put my heart into keeping a family together. The same house where my daughter-in-law had stood only days earlier, shouting at me and ordering me to get out. I stepped inside without hesitation. Every corner looked colder, every wall felt unfamiliar, but my purpose kept me steady. I wasn't there to argue. I wasn't there to cry. I wasn't there to ask for respect. I was there to present the truth and draw a line no one would ever cross again. My son and my daughter-in-law were sitting in the living room when I walked in. Their expressions shifted the moment they saw me. My son's face tightened with unease. My daughter-in-law's confidence flickered for a second, but she quickly straightened her back, trying to act like nothing troubled her. I could tell she expected me to come back with apologies, excuses, or explanations. She expected weakness. She expected guilt. She expected the same quiet woman who had always tried to keep peace. But that woman was gone. I sat down calmly, placed the folder on the table, and looked at them without anger, without rush, without fear. I let the silence do the work for me. It was surprising how powerful silence could be. It made them restless. It made them question. It made them worry. Then I opened the folder and laid out each document slowly and clearly. Deeds, legal papers, proof of ownership, and statements all spread across the table like a clean map of truth. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse anyone. I simply showed what was already mine. Every paper had my signature. Every stamp carried legal weight. Every line proved my next words without needing emotion behind them. My daughter-in-law's face drained of all color as she leaned forward to read the documents. She tried to hide her panic, but it showed in her eyes. My son's hands trembled very slightly. He kept looking at the papers and then looking at me, as if trying to understand how all of this had happened without them knowing. That was the moment I realized they had underestimated me for far too long. They thought I was old, tired, and easy to push aside. They thought I didn't understand things. They thought I didn't pay attention. And they believed they were safe treating me the way they did because they assumed I had nothing to protect myself with. But now every false belief was falling apart in front of them. I explained slowly and clearly that I had full control of my property, my finances, and my future. I explained that months earlier I had already prepared everything with the lawyer, anticipating that disrespect and mistreatment were growing stronger in the home. I explained that my name alone held the power in these papers, and no one, not my son, not my daughter-in-law, had the legal right to remove me, threaten me, or treat me as if I didn't matter. Their silence deepened. Their confidence shrank. The shift in power was not loud. It was quiet, steady, and undeniable. I told them I wasn't there to argue. I wasn't there to beg for space. I wasn't there to fix what they had broken. I was there to give them a final decision, one that would shape our family going forward. I told them they would treat me with respect, or they would never see me again, not in their home, not in their celebrations, not in their children's lives, and not in any part of my will or my legacy. The ultimatum wasn't spoken with anger. It didn't need to be. It stood firm on the foundation of truth and preparation. Their faces looked like they had been carved out of stone, pale, stiff, and lost. My daughter-in-law couldn't find a single word. My son opened his mouth a few times, but nothing came out. For once, they had no control left to cling to. The silence in that room became the final answer. And I knew then that everything had changed. When the truth finally came out and the papers were on the table, everything changed in an instant. The silence in that room was heavy, thick, and full of all the things they never expected to face. My daughter-in-law, who had spent months shouting at me, mocking me, and acting like she owned every space she walked into, suddenly stood still with fear in her eyes. She had built her confidence on the idea that I was weak, alone, and confused, but now she saw that every step she took to push me out of my own home had been matched by a quiet step I took to protect myself, and she finally understood that she had no power over anything that belonged to me. My son looked just as shocked, trying to make sense of what he thought he controlled and what he had just learned. He realized that the property, the decisions, and the future were not in his hands at all. The legal protection I put in place made sure no one could touch my house, my rights, or my dignity. I had done everything quietly and properly, months before they ever raised their voices at me. The consequence of their behavior came down on them without me needing to shout, argue, or cry. Their plan to push me out of the house collapsed right in front of them. The neighbors who had witnessed the earlier humiliation now watched a different scene. Two people forced to face the truth that they had gone too far. Even without words, the message was clear. They had underestimated the wrong person. Their arrogance had blinded them, and their belief that I would break easily turned into the biggest mistake they had made in years. They tried to shift blame, tried to pretend they didn't know what they were doing, but it didn't help. The papers were signed, sealed, and protected by law. No argument could undo them. No excuses could reverse them. And the more they tried to explain themselves, the more obvious their guilt became. My daughter-in-law's face twisted with regret. But it wasn't real remorse. It was fear. Fear of losing control. Fear of losing benefits. Fear of losing the power she thought she had gained over my son and over me. She realized that her threats meant nothing now. The house was not hers. The future was not hers. And the chance to manipulate me was gone for good. My son looked at the floor, understanding too late that standing silently while someone mistreated me made him just as responsible. He saw now that respect wasn't automatic just because he was family. It had to be earned, kept, and protected. And he had failed in every part of that responsibility. I felt no pride in watching them crumble, but I felt a deep sense of justice. I had not fought them with anger. I had not insulted them. I had simply shown them the truth, that preparation and self-respect are stronger than shouting and cruelty. The biggest consequence wasn't legal. It was emotional. The trust between us broke in a way that could not be repaired overnight. They saw clearly that I had stepped back not because I was powerless, but because I was choosing peace over conflict while preparing for the moment I needed strength. And when that moment came, I used it. They learned that silence is not weakness. It can be strategy. It can be protection. It can be the loudest answer of all. After the confrontation ended, they walked away slower than they came, no longer full of confidence, no longer laughing, no longer treating me like a burden. They left my home knowing they could never speak to me the way they had before. They knew I had drawn a line they could not cross again without facing real consequences. The house felt different after they left, not because it was quiet, but because the weight of their disrespect was gone. I walked through the rooms with a calm I had not felt in months. Every corner reminded me of the life I had built, the sacrifices I had made, and the strength I still held. They had tried to take that away from me, but they failed. And the reason they failed was simple. I refused to let their anger define me. Instead, I let their anger motivate me to protect myself in the smartest way possible. That was the consequence they never saw coming. They believed victory came from raising their voices. But in the end, victory came from me protecting my life quietly, wisely, and legally. It wasn't revenge, it was justice. When everything finally settled and the shouting had faded into memory, I found myself standing alone in my small living room, surrounded by quiet that felt heavier than any insult my daughter-in-law had ever thrown at me. The silence after a storm is strange. It gives you space to breathe, but it also forces you to face everything you ignored for years. And as I sat down in my old armchair, the one I bought decades ago with money I earned through hard, honest work, I realized something powerful. I had allowed them to treat me the way they did, not because I was weak, not because I didn't know better, but because I loved my son so much that I kept giving chances to someone who never deserved even the first one. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I didn't relive the moment she screamed at me to get out. Instead, I felt something inside me settle, like a door closing gently after being left open for too long. In the days that followed, the calls came. First from neighbors who had heard part of the argument, then from extended relatives who pretended to be concerned but were only hungry for gossip. I answered no one. I chose peace over noise. Eventually, my son called, not to apologize, but to justify his wife's behavior. He said I had misunderstood, that she was emotional, that I should let it go. That was the moment I realized I had raised a man who knew my worth but chose convenience over loyalty. It stung, but it also freed me. I knew then that walking away wasn't a loss. It was the beginning of reclaiming my voice. I used the time to organize my documents, review my estate plans, and speak with my lawyer, not out of revenge, but out of clarity. I made choices that protected me, choices I should have made long ago. I rewrote my will. I shifted property rights. I listed beneficiaries carefully. I made sure everything was legal, clean, and airtight. My son and daughter-in-law had expected me to disappear quietly after being thrown out of a home I had helped them furnish. But they didn't realize that I was not the helpless woman they tried to paint me as. I was a mother, a grandmother, a survivor of decades of hard life, and nothing about me was fragile. Weeks later, they arrived at my doorstep pretending nothing had happened. The apology never came. Instead, they brought excuses wrapped in smiles. My daughter-in-law spoke softly, using sweet words she never used before. My son stood behind her, stiff and uncomfortable. They thought time had erased everything. They thought age had weakened me. They thought I would welcome them back with open arms because families should stay together. I listened. I nodded, and then I told them the truth, that respect, once broken, is not easily repaired, and access to my life, my home, and my future wasn't something they could command whenever it suited them. Their faces dropped when they realized the shift in power. My daughter-in-law went pale when she understood she had shouted at the one person who had protected her more times than she would ever admit. My son looked stunned when he learned that the property they believed they would inherit was no longer theirs to claim. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't insult them. I simply laid out the facts, calm, clear, final. And when they left that day, they walked out with the same silence I had walked away with weeks earlier. But now the silence belonged to them. Peace returned to my life like sunlight through a window that had always been there, but stayed covered by curtains of guilt, obligation, and misplaced loyalty. I cooked for myself. I slept without worry. I cleaned my house with music playing in the background. I laughed at small things. I finally felt like I had taken my life back, and one morning, as I stood on my porch listening to the birds, I understood the greatest lesson of all. You teach people how to treat you by what you allow. I had allowed too much. And now I was done allowing anything that cost me my dignity. The moral of my story is simple. Family does not give anyone the right to disrespect you. Love does not mean surrender. Age does not mean silence. You can walk away and still love deeply. You can choose peace without choosing weakness. And when someone tells you to leave, sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away and never let them push you back into the same place again. I didn't lose a home that day. I regained myself. And that, more than anything, is the kind of victory that no daughter-in-law's scream can ever take away.